Welcome to Basic Black. Some of you are joining us on our broadcast, and others of you are joining us on our digital platforms. I'm Philip Martin, Senior Investigative Reporter, GBH News Center for Investigative Reporting, and your host. Tonight, the latest on the new migrants living here in Massachusetts. Reports reveal the strain to provide services for migrants and immigrants is just about everywhere, from healthcare to food, and most importantly, housing. Earlier this month, state lawmakers approved additional funding for temporary shelters after space was near capacity. As individuals and families who have come to the area to flee conflict and violence and geopolitics, what alternative solutions are available to ease housing placement and lengthy waiting periods? Is the state's 40-year-old right to shelter living up to its promise? Joining us tonight to discuss, Iván Espinoza-Madrigal, Executive Director of Lawyers for Civil Rights Boston, Dr. Gerald Gabot, Founder and Executive Director of the Immigrant Family Services Institute, or IFSI, USA, Donna Mitria, Triage Team Manager at La Colaborativa in Chelsea, and Stephanie Rosario Rodriguez, Senior Director of Programs, Mira Coalition. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
That first question is, of course, the question everyone is wondering. Near capacity, the state lawmakers stepped in after the Lawyers Committee sued for the right to shelter, to live up to the promise of the right to shelter. But where are we right now in terms of this situation, Iván? You still have families coming in, both migrants and those who are Massachusetts area residents, some U.S. citizens. How is this working out?
Thank you for having me. The situation on the ground is complex because what we are seeing is really the concurrent and overlapping crisis surrounding housing unavailability, the housing scarcity, with the migrant crisis. And so these two things are blending and merging on the ground. So we are experiencing an acute need for housing, not just for U.S. citizens and people who've been longtime residents in the greater Boston area, but for new families that are arriving. And it's important to think about this not just as this is something that the state needs to provide and that's a drain. This is also an economic opportunity, and I think that gets lost in much of the discussion. The people that are coming in are eager to work. And we all are familiar with the help wanted signs in shops and businesses. And we need to be thinking about these things a lot more intersectionally and really think about it as what are the opportunities that lie ahead. And yes, right now, we do need more housing, more resources, more support for these families, particularly women and children. But this could very well pay back dividends in the long term.
Well, one of the issues that folks are saying, of course, we talked about what's driving migrants here. We talked about the climate change, violence, so on and so forth. Donna, what are you seeing in terms of who's arriving in the state? It's and are they being provided what they need? Given what Iván was just talking about with the housing crisis, you also have medical crisis where individuals are going into hospitals, Boston Medical Center, for example, where some doctors are saying, well, this is overcapacity. Where you also have a situation of clothing, things of that sort. How are the basic needs being taken care of in the context of finite resources?
Yeah, I think to go off of what Iván was saying, in addition to in Boston, right, we have a shortage of medical professionals as well. So a lot of the times, right, we might see that a lot of these migrants, they come with medical issues. I had a family recently from Venezuela come in with a son who had myopia.
Yes.
And he was wearing the same pair of contacts for 30 days when he came into my office to see me. And this family was somebody that they were placed in a hotel just for a few nights, and the best that we could offer them was a warming shelter at the end of their stay. And I think that, again, a lot of this like housing crisis, these medical issues are compounding issues that have been around for a long time, and it's really the responsibility now of the government, who's been seeing these issues happening for so long, to take accountability for their lack of action in years past.
You know, the way a lot of this has also been framed is that individuals are coming in large number simply to work. And obviously work permits, as you point out, Iván, are absolutely necessary in order for people to live. But folks are also seeking refugee status. And you have, you have a situation where individuals, Jerome, and individuals, Stephanie, are seeking refugee status. Haiti right now is at the worst crisis perhaps we've seen in years. Venezuela is facing a massive crisis leading to an outflow. And you still have ongoing crisis in Central America. Talk about the refugee status of these individuals. Is it being honored, the whole notion of refugee applications, as we've seen in the past? We'll start with you, Jerome.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I always say, it depends on how you see the problem, because your perspective determines exactly the action that you're going to take. If you see those who are coming here seeking refuge as a burden, guess what? You're going to kind of put yourself in this little cocoon where you say, I don't want to do anything to help them. But if you see them first as people who are seeking refuge, who are fleeing violence, and then who are coming here not only to seek refuge, but also to make us better and stronger. Because I always said, refugees, immigrants, they make us stronger and better. We are a country of immigrants. If you see them as assets, you will do whatever it takes, to welcome them and to make sure that they have the legal status that they need. So you are in a system where, when you're looking at the number of judges compared to the number of people who are coming, to get, the status, it's like it's a world of difference.
Immigrant judges.
Immigration
judges.
Immigration judges.
Yes.
So we don't have enough immigration judges. We don't have enough lawyers. We don't have enough paralegals. And still, you are asking them to go through such a long period of time before they can really get some type of status. So we are, living in a situation where everything is upside down. And I think right now, we need to be thinking creatively in terms of, the return on our investment. As Iván said, those are people that we need. Massachusetts needs that. The U.S. needs those people. Because right now we are in a crisis where all sectors are suffering. They don't have enough workers. They don't have enough nurses, not enough drivers. Not enough anything. But here they are coming to you. So if you are smart, what you will do, you will quickly invest in them so you can see your return on investment.
But people are also looking for a differentiation between refugees, those seeking who are coming here because of violence and geopolitical conflicts of one sort or another. And Stephanie, can you talk about how that difference is playing out in migrant communities and here in Massachusetts and in courts, if you will? Because you hear that some people have a level of tolerations for refugees, but they certainly differentiate for those who are seeking or said to be seeking work permits only and are escaping a poverty as opposed to conflict. Your view?
Yeah, a lot of the families that I've spoken to and have had the opportunity to meet over the last few months and years are really coming here for a better life, right? And often they're fleeing gang violence. Often they're fleeing discrimination. I've always said, if you're willing to take your baby and your family through the jungle for days, what is behind you is significantly worse, right? So there is a complex level of issues that many of these families are coming in. And many of them are coming with a variety of different statuses. They might be seeking asylum. They might be seeking refugee status. And I think that many of them are still understanding and learning to navigate this incredibly complex process on their own. As Dr. Gabot said, there is a shortage of immigration attorneys, and many of these families don't know how to navigate this process, right? And I think that's going to really impact how this is viewed in the media, right? Like, we have sympathy for people that enter some way, but not others, or from some countries and not others. And over the last few years, I would say the largest population that we're seeing now are Haitian immigrants, but there are many coming from across Central and South America as well, seeking a variety of different legal statuses. And they're trying to work with our pre-existing system. It is just so complicated and so convoluted that many don't know where to begin or where to take the next step.
Is Massachusetts, Massachusetts, of course, is regarded as one of those states that is more or less a haven for migrants. Compared to other states, for example, you don't see Governor Healy, for example, putting people on buses to go anywhere. Obviously, I'm referring to what's happening in Texas, where there's a whole different view of immigration. But at the same time, you have the preponderance of people coming into the country are coming apparently along the border, and they're arriving in places like Massachusetts. Is it fair, in your view, to make that comparison as I'm making it? Does Texas, in fact, have a greater burden than, let's say, a Massachusetts? And should we be sympathetic to that?
So a couple of points. One is, as we've already been talking about, many of the countries where people are coming from are in complete distress and collapse, like Haiti and Venezuela. And I think we go down a road that we don't necessarily want to go in when we start talking about who are sympathetic immigrants versus who are not sympathetic immigrants, because time and time again, we've seen that whiter immigrants tend to be more warmly received than people of color.
From the Ukraine, for example.
Ukraine is an excellent example. Yeah. There is a welcome mat for certain immigrants when immigrants for Haiti, for example, have long suffered with stigma surrounding having disease or being undesirable, things that are inherently racist. And so it's important for us to be careful about that. And another point that I want to make is that we are assuming that the floodgates are open and that people are just going to keep coming. And that's not true.
Because that's the way it's being promulgated.
Yeah, that's not
true.
Right. Immigration comes in waves. And there's so many factors that affect people's lives and migration patterns. We're experiencing right now a particular spike. That spike didn't exist maybe a year ago. And it might not exist 1 year from now. But at the same time, we are reacting as if this is the new normal. And I don't believe that's true, because even in a matter of weeks, the situation at the border could change. And that leads me to my final point in response to your question. The reason why we see the chaos and the mess in states like Texas is particularly because of the absence of federal oversight, the absence of federal guidelines, the absence of federal authority. Immigrants are under federal jurisdiction, and the federal government should have asserted itself so that we don't see buses coming from Texas or flights being sent by DeSantis to Martha's Vineyard.
And this is so important, and that's why this type of elucidation is so important, because there is, in fact, a large disconnect between what is happening in migrant communities, what is happening to migrants, to immigrants to this country, and the reality. A reality such that the Republicans, for example, have an 18-point difference in terms of trust on immigration than, for example, Democrats. You also have a president, a former president, Donald Trump, who has basically advanced the notion of detention centers for immigrants coming to this country, if, in fact, he is made president. Stephanie, comment on that, please.
Truly, it's an atrocity. And I think we as community activists and organizers and attorneys need to be prepared for what's coming, right? He has had 4 years and to better plan, to get his teams together, to understand the way politics move, right, in order to try to implement some of these incredibly racist and incredibly destructive practices. You know, I think there is a growing concern concern leading up to the next election, not just in immigrant communities, but by those who serve them, as to how do we prepare and how do we fight back for this, right? There are teams of people that are constantly, on edge about what this could mean. I was reflecting earlier about back when he was elected the first time, I worked at a homeless shelter, and the entire morning I was fielding questions from families of like, what's going to happen to me? What do we do? And it was scary for them, for us. We didn't know what would happen, right? And we need to, as a society, remember, where do we want to be on this side of history? We look back at these detention centers, concentration camps, whatever language you want to put on them, right, that have often been race-specific, that have often been due to some geopolitical fight over something, right? And it harms so many families and so many communities. And to Dr. Gabo's point, these are individuals that can bring innovation and can be an asset to our Commonwealth, right? We have been a space for thriving communities, and I hope that we can continue to that and to be a model for other states to follow.
Well, I want to ask both you and Donna, how do you basically reframe it then? What might be those innovative steps that can be taken to reframe this conversation such that people aren't reacting in fear to the notion of migration as opposed to understanding its advantages?
Yeah. I mean, it's all about who's telling the stories. And I think that's one of the reasons why so often I find myself, in front of a camera, because we need to be able to tell our stories. When we let others tell the stories for us, guess what? They can, put the stories the way that they feel. But when we come and we really tell the truth, we said, the U.S. had a role in what's going on in Haiti right now. So it's like this level of impunity where you think you can go, you destroy the country, and then you're here staying quietly, enjoying yourself while those people are dying. How is it that Haiti is in the situation that they are in right now? It's because of what the U.S. has done to Haiti. So we need to tell the stories. We need to tell, what's going on right now in Haiti. Why is it that we have so many young kids with guns into their hands? We do not produce them. So you go and you destroy, you put guns in the hands of young people, and then now you are pushing people to leave the country. And then now you're telling me, oh no, you're going to put them in detention center. That's a level of impunity that I think we should all be out there to denounce it, because it's not fair, it's not just. So I think we need to be thinking about those who are fleeing as human beings. And that's one of the things that I always said. Whenever we're talking about immigration, we always believe that we're talking about an issue. We're not talking about an issue. We're talking about human being. We're talking about people's lives. We're talking about children, women, men. We are human beings.
Crossing borders with difficulty. And Donna, that same question, the point that Dr. Gabo was just making of how to humanize people. What is the story?
Yeah, I think that something that a lot of people in the United States simply don't understand is the historical context of the countries that we come from, the historical context of the U.S.'s involvement in a lot of these countries, and more so the U.S.'s involvement to destabilize these countries and the lasting effects that they've had on families over generations, and why that has led to these families needing to flee their countries of origin to come to the United States.
Destabilization, for example, of Central America.
Central America, Latin America, Haiti, a lot of these countries that have resources have always been a target for countries that don't necessarily produce those resources naturally. Oil, minerals, all those types of things, right?
But perhaps the story of individuals, perhaps that is a better way to humanize. When you talk about families, I mean, I can't imagine going through a jungle in Panama and coming to and crossing several countries in order to reach the Guatemala-Mexico border, and from there to get to the Mexican border. I can't imagine doing that.
Right, and that brings me to my next point. I think that's something that's very unique about Massachusetts is the way that it has such tight-knit communities. And I think if we really want to address the issues and be a model for the rest of the country, we have to uplift those tight-knit communities, the communities that are the community organizations that are on the ground, working with these families, uplifting their stories, uplifting just all of the things that they've gone through, but more importantly, providing them a pathway and a future here in the United States. I think that's something, for example, I've learned in my time working in Chelsea. You know, it's a 1.7 square mile city, and for better or for worse, it has a very close community, you know, and I think that in a way is how we can all come together as a society and better heal and learn to empathize with our neighbor if we actually know them, if we actually are out in the street and like recognizing, hey, I know so-and-so who works at this convenience store, you know, that kind of thing would really like help us as a society heal.
That empathy you're talking about is so important. And it is so important, we know, to humanize people, to humanize them as individuals. It's to humanize them as a collective, so on and so forth. What is Massachusetts doing right, Iván? What is Massachusetts, and I'll ask all of you that question.
Right.
What is Massachusetts doing right by immigrants?
Well, maybe it's less about what Massachusetts is doing right and more building on what my colleague is talking about, community. Because as I keep thinking about the current immigrant crisis, I also think about our own experience at Lawyers for Civil Rights, not just working on the legal front of the current crisis, but responding to the Martha's Vineyard flights that were sent by DeSantis. When those flights landed, it wasn't just the government on the ground. It was community. It was neighbors coming with winter jackets, with winter coats, with canned foods. It was the dentist down the street checking a little kid who just got off the plane and was in pain. It was making sure that all of these resources, that a constellation of resources were being mobilized. And the government played a central role in that. But it really was a partnership, and it was anchored in community. And the way that those nearly 50 migrants of Martha's Vineyard were supported, I think provides a model for how we can deal with the migrant crisis. And yet, we never, over the past 6 months, 12 months, have seen that type of coordination or deployment of resources. It is either the government doing it alone or having a group, and they're doing fearless work. I mean, it's incredible. La Colaborativa, it's incredible the work that Dr. Gabo is doing every day. But they're also not doing it with the type of partnerships that were deployed even in the private sector to respond to the Martha's Vineyard crisis. So we're missing some pieces.
Okay, so sticking with that, and we're counting down the seconds here. Humanizing of this population so that others can understand it. Let's just go around. We get 30 seconds each, if you will.
Yes, these are your neighbors. This could be you. You know, I've always strongly believed that it's important for us to know who's in our community, and because they're gonna, you know, you want them to help you in the same way that we would put forward to help our neighbors.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying that look at all of the departments, you know, the government, look at who is working there. And think about those people who are now in whatever positions. One day they probably were part of those who were fleeing. And then now, because they were given an opportunity, now they are working for the state. They are working for the city. So we have those potential here. So it's a matter of giving them this opportunity to, you know, fly, to find a place to stay, to find the English classes that they need. And then before you know it, they are coming. They will be the next, you know, director of your department. So we're talking about real, you know, assets in our midst, and that we need to think about them, you know, in terms of their contribution to our Commonwealth.
And I must say, I worry about many of the migrants. We talk about a place to stay. Many have been forced out of the latest large shelter, which was, of course, was the State Transportation Department downtown. Where are they going, Donna?
Yeah, so that's been a huge challenge for us on the ground, is trying to centralize and find these warming shelters. And, you know, a lot of the time that means relying on the infrastructure that already exists. You know, churches who have been doing this work for years. For example, the Malden Warming Center is where has been a huge resource for us. It's the closest and like anything resembling a shelter in Chelsea, like near Chelsea, that we can send families to. And a lot of the times we see families make the choice, the conscious choice, not to go to shelters that are located in Boston because they don't have the community, they don't have the transportation, and they would rather be close to things that they know instead of moving away from something new. And I think it speaks to that.
Okay. And next steps, again, about 20 seconds.
We need better coordination of resources across sectors, government, public sector, private sector. That's what we need here, and federal protection as well.
Okay, Dr. Gabo.
And we also need to be intentional about helping those who are in need. So we have a duty to care for those who are in our midst and we need help. So we need to be intentional about that coordination that Iván is talking by bringing all of the resources where they need to be so we can serve those families.
Great term, Stephanie. Last word.
And we saw that in the Sturge clinic that happened recently to help migrants get work authorization, how that coordination really builds and gets work done, right? We need much more of that. But not only that, let's take a look at our cost of housing. Let's take a look at expediting work authorizations, which is really a call to the federal government to help support that. Because if families want to get out of shelter, which they very desperately do, we need to help them get working and get out of there in order to they can keep their lives moving.
Folks, I think I really appreciate this conversation. This is so absolutely important. That's the end of our broadcast and the end of our show. Thank you to all our guests, and thank you for watching. But before we go, this is our final episode of the year. We have some sad news to report. Our colleague and associate producer of Basic Black, Kendrick Mercado, passed away last week. Kendrick was an integral part of the show and will be truly missed. Our condolences go out to his friends, GBH colleagues, and his family. Now stay with us as we continue our conversation on our digital platforms, YouTube and Facebook. I'm Philip Martin, your host. We are on YouTube and Facebook with our post show. We're continuing our discussion, the latest on migrants and immigrants living in Massachusetts. And we were talking about some of the questions about how do you basically get the public to accept what has become an incredibly controversial issue. You have, again, where Republicans, many on the far right, have basically seen this as an opportunity to further to sow greater divisions. But as a result, you have an 18-point difference between Republicans and Democrats on the question of who they trust to deal with immigration. Apparently, a lot of people are fine with the notion of an administration that could come in, led by people like Stephen Miller, who would build what are essentially concentration camps. I personally am alarmed by this notion, and I'm just wondering your thoughts about this notion of building concentration camps after the lessons of World War II and Japanese incarceration, after children were detained under the Trump administration. Iván, what's your thought about all this?
Well, it's frustrating to me to see that we are at this juncture, that we are at a place where even Democrats are exhausted about immigration. And I think, frankly, it's because the White House hasn't been able to manage the issue in the right way. The president has been surrounding himself with people who keep saying immigration is the third rail. Immigration will cost you the election. Avoid it like the plague. And then that leaves a vacuum where players like DeSantis are flying migrants to Martha's Vineyard. That leads to buses being deployed to northern cities, to Boston, to New York, to Chicago, to the other places. And that leads to the type of frustrated dynamics that we've been talking about here today. And so what I'm seeing is really the collateral effect of a federal inaction. And so it doesn't surprise me that people are so frustrated by the issue and that Republicans are now trying to get ahead of it by saying, well, we're just going to be tougher and we're going to be tougher in Trump 2.0 than we were under Trump 1.0.
Well, that goes beyond the White House. I mean, you still have a lot of inaction legislatively.
Yeah.
The Congress has not been able to come up with any type of comprehensive immigration policy. And you seem to have an impenetrable division in terms of this bubble between Republicans and Democrats, with Republicans not willing largely to accept a comprehensive program that would bring more migrants, that would allow more migrants into the country. What are your feelings about this?
I think that there's been a lack of reform surrounding our immigration laws for a very long time. You know, a lot of the times, families that are second, third generation immigrants, they might not understand the struggle of present day immigrants and the laws that have kind of changed or been removed and reformed since their families originally came over, you know, and I think that is part of the issue, right? The United States, we prided ourselves at one point in being the country that was most welcoming to immigrants, you know, the melting pot of the world. And I think that over time we've lost that. We've become extremely individualistic. And it makes it hard to go back to our point, it makes it hard to empathize for these families that are fleeing violence, you know? The blame is placed on the families for not being able to overcome all of these barriers, rather than seeing the barriers as something that our government and us as the United States of America can kind of work on together.
Iván suggested that this is tainted by, among other factors, racism. Stephanie, what's your view about that?
I mean, I think if they were coming from a country that wasn't a predominantly black country, this might be a different conversation, right? And I think that we can't ignore that. I think that that's a very big thing. And to your point, I think we're at a point in time where, you know, the cost of everything has increased, the cost of groceries, the cost of housing. And a lot of families, whether immigrant families or not, are feeling that burden. And they're seeing immigrants coming in, and they're seeing these big amount of money being discussed in the media, and they feel threatened. They said, but my community needs something, or my family needs something, right? And they're not seeing it as an asset or a value add. And I think that that narrative is so pervasive, and I think that that's what is central in so many conversations, right? I would love to see, I always encourage families and people that are maybe unsure about this issue, and often, you know, sometimes it's people that are like pro-immigrants but tired, right? And it's like, well, get out there and meet some of these families. Come to your local community-based organization and see what they're doing and see the work that's happening on the ground. Meet some of these families and children, and I feel like that would have a significant impact.
Well, you know, I'd like to turn the conversation for a second to the Quincy Center. But before I do that, I'm just going to read a question that someone asked me in an interview. And this is someone who favors immigration, and he just said, when is enough enough? When is it over capacity? When is it over capacity? That's what's your thought about that? You're hearing these questions a lot.
Yeah, definitely. And again, like I said, it's the way that we see, you know, the issue. If we see it as something positive, so we will, you know, take the steps. So when we're talking about, overcapacity, yes, we had a housing crisis before, you know, those people started to come. However, how much, you know, have we done creatively? Because I'm always pushing people to think outside of the box. How much have we done, you see what I mean, to make sure that we do have, you know, capacity? So I think it's so easy for people to just hide themselves, you know, to this, oh, we don't have enough capacity, so which means that we don't want to do anymore. And I believe that, again, we need to lead by example. We need to do better. You remember that, issue of One Day Without Immigrants?
Yes,
and I think,
the movie.
Yeah, exactly.
A Day Without a Mexican, I think it was called, wasn't it?
Yes.
One Day Without a Mexican.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I think we need to be proactive and start building a movement where we can show the power of immigrants.
You mean what happens if you don't have immigration?
Exactly. Hospitals. No, who is going to take care of all of my elderlies, all of those people who are sick? Drivers, who is going to transport the kids? You know, just name it wherever. Okay, whatever sector you need them. So let's put together that One Day Without Immigrants and see all of those people who are talking, whether or not they will have any word, because we need them to get this economy.
If you decide to do that, let us know, because that's a great story for us.
Oh, yes.
You know?
Yes,
yeah.
exactly. And it would be chaos. Just think about every sector. It would be a chaos if we do not show for work. If everyone will be in despair because they need immigrants to do the work. So let's invest in them. Let's open up the doors. Let's welcome them.
Let's talk about also what is on the table right now. What are your thoughts about the Quincy Center?
I mean, Quincy is just, one center, very limited in terms of capacity. I think Quincy only has capacity for 57 or 60 families. So it's just one step toward, building more. So we need more and more welcome centers as a way to really, welcome those people. So it's one step. Is
the location a problem for people who are staying there?
I mean, again, when we're talking about housing, especially right now, it's like wherever you can find a place to welcome families, I would welcome that, because we can always transport them. It's not the perfect location, as you can imagine, but again, as long as we can find a place for them and then provide transportation so that they can go back and forth. Because remember, those welcome centers are supposed to be temporary. So our bigger job now is how do we have an exit strategies. So as soon as families come, we get them everything that they need, all of the benefit, work permit, we connect them with jobs so they can go and be on their own. That's all they need. They don't want to depend on the state.
So you're saying the key are work permits. So what's your thought on it?
I think what I'm hearing from everybody throughout this conversation is a scarcity mindset.
Yes.
I think in the United States it's very intentional the way that established families and new arrival families are kind of being told there just aren't enough resources. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, we also have this narrative as being the most powerful and rich country in the world. So I think that a lot of that, they're two very different statements. It's either we're going to be providing for all people that are living in the United States, right? Healthcare, public transportation, community resources, or are we really not as powerful, and are we just trying to divide the population?
The scarcity issue is a powerful issue, and Iván and Stephanie, when you hear mayors of local communities saying, look, we can't do anymore. I'm not talking about state representatives. I'm not talking about the governor, the attorney general. When you hear mayors saying we can't, this is as far as we can go, what do you do under those circumstances?
I think, again, Dr. Gabot really pointed to a very elegant answer, which is we need to maximize and coordinate better. And even the question that you were posing that somebody you interviewed was talking about, well, if you're over capacity, well, there is such a thing as being over capacity. And maybe I would concede that at some point, but not right now. I mean, when we filed our lawsuit against the state to get more resources into the migrant shelters, that prompted the state legislature to appropriate $250 million. And so clearly there were more resources. This is a resource-rich state. It is a matter of priorities. What are we spending the money on? And I'm not saying that there aren't other priorities, but this should be one of them. And so the deployment of resources needs to be more strategic, needs to be more intentional, needs to be aligned with the needs in the community. And so when I hear mayors say, I'm over capacity, I don't have the resources, what I think about is these mayors need more support. These mayors need to also be debriefed on what are the assets and benefits that we're talking about that are going to be long-term for their communities. And so, again, this is a particular spike that we're experiencing right now, but this is not going to be our lived reality for years on end. We need to deal with the crisis, and that's why it's called a crisis, because we're dealing with it right now. We need better coordination and deployment. Another thing that came out of this fall with intense conversations with the legislature, with the governor's office, is that United Way stepped up to support a lot of these efforts in ways that they hadn't done during the summer. And so I still think we are not fully maximizing and coordinating to the best of our ability. I want to be in a position where we have left no stone unturned.
That's
and
right.
I don't think we're there yet.
Exactly.
This is a really interesting point. Stephanie, last word.
Yeah, a lot of community-based organizations in these cities are doing this work, right? So it really does involve the local government teaming up with these organizations that have been at the front lines of this for many, many years. And not just providing shelter, but healthcare, legal services, childcare, vaccines, all the above, right? And you mentioned, is the Quincy enough? It's not enough, right? And it's not so much about the location, too. We have to remember that Massachusetts is a large state. So there are Western Mass, Central Mass, Metro West. All of these areas need to be touched and need to be supported, right? So if we concentrate some of our resources on the eastern side, people might see it as like a Boston problem or like that's their problem. But really what we need is all of us to kind of unite. And we saw at the Surge Clinic how powerful it be when the federal government, the local government, the state government, and then nonprofits, lawyers, and they all come together and they made movement, like significant movement in a couple weeks. And I think that could be followed in a bunch of different ways as well.
This is great. All of you have presented a very different reality than many people are experiencing when they talk about migration and immigration to Massachusetts. And folks should understand that there are solutions and that and that there are resources. I think Iván pointed it out very well that when you have the governor, understandably, he had made a point that, we have a cutoff. I don't know if it was arbitrary or not, but I think she said 7,500 places, right?
Yes.
Now we find that there are other places because of the lawsuit that was launched by the Lawyers Committee and the work that all of you are doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And this has been a fulfilling discussion. Thank you. Dr. Cabot, Stephanie, Donna, Iván.
Thank you for having
Thank
us.
you.
My thanks to you also.